and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episodes of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Thank you very much for that. The Hazelburn episode of the show, incidentally, has had more views in the first week of being posted up on YouTube than any other of the videos that I've ever done, which is really cool. So yeah, your continued support is very, very much appreciated. This week's episode of the show, as you can see from the title page, is about the Wolfburn Distillery. Now, this is not the first time I've done an episode of the show on Wolfburn. I did one, and I think it was in 2019. And part of the reason for doing this week's episode was that sort of mid last year, the distillery kindly sent me a sample of one of their sort of batch releases. And I really intended to use it in an episode of the show. It's sort of a general roundup kind of episode of the show, but it just never happened. I've got so many samples that are just waiting for that general roundup episode of the show or something of that kind of ilk. And you know, I really wanted to sort of, you know, have a look at the distillery again, because I mean, I'm a big fan of Wolfburn, and so I basically thought the easiest thing to do is just go and buy one of their gift packs with a miniature of each of the 4 bottlings in their range. It's quite a nice box, and if you've never tasted Wolfburn before, it's a sort of cost-effective way of getting a look at their entire range. So that is what I decided to do, and as you can see, I have the samples here in front of me now. Wolfburn itself is now the most further northerly, oh good God, I can't talk, the furthest northerly Scottish mainland distillery. Yeah, got it out. So displacing Pulteney, having that claim to fame. So Thurso right up on the north coast, and it's not a resurrected distillery, although there used to be a Wolfburn distillery within the vicinity, which was in production from 1821 to 1860 sometime, and it's kind of one of those distilleries that sort of defies the Goodrum first law of whiskey, which, if you didn't know what the first law of Goodrum first law of whiskey was, is that pretty distillery generally equals pretty whiskey. Because I don't think you could actually describe the distillery, which is on an industrial estate in Thurso, although it's not exactly sort of, you know, sort of a manky old industrial estate. It does actually look quite pleasant, lots of green and stuff, lots of grass around it and all what have you. But it's kind of, it's not a looker of a distillery, it has to be said. I mean, it's kind of has a nod back to distillery building of the 1960s, which, as far as I could tell, was very much a functional period of distillery building. You know, it was maybe a kind of I don't know, maybe it was influenced by the whole concept of the 60s and the sort of rejection of the earlier years, and maybe, you know, we don't want this sort of fancy Victorian edifice, we want a sort of a brutalist inspired 1960s modernist piece of architecture. And well, although it's not quite brutalist building, it has to be said, it's certainly a sort of like I said, it's a kind of a modern take on a 1960s building, in my personal opinion, and it really doesn't, it's not a looker at all, unless of course that sort of like 1960s brutalist architecture is your cup of tea, you know, and floats your boat, as they say, then you'll love it. But for me, yeah, okay. Anyway, the thing that I do, apart from obviously the building, which is kind of neither here nor there, the spirit is what I'm really interested in. And, you know, as far as I can see, the distillery does everything the right way. So we have a long wort fermentation, 70 to 92 hours, slow distillation in small copper stills, plenty of copper contact, shell and tube condensers. I almost said conditioners then, didn't I? Shell and tube condensers, plenty of copper contact, light, elegant, coastal spirit. Bottles nicely at a young age, job done as far as I can see. And And one of the other things that I like about the distillery is that although they do have a bit of a nod to their Viking heritage, they certainly don't plunder it like certain other distilleries. Now, you know, I'm a bit of a sucker for, you know, Viking kind of mythology and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's not a surprise given my surname, is it really? But I like how the use of that is understated. It's not kind of like, you know, shoving sort of runes and what have you in your face. It's kind of, yeah. And I think that kind of, to a certain extent, pretty much sums up the whole ethos of the distillery. Understated. And they don't make a big fuss about anything. And again, like I said, they do everything the right way. Predominant use of American oak, quarter casks, hoggies and barrels. 15% going into sherry casks. Non-chill filtered, 46% bottling, you know, and even though that the guy that the distillery manager, a chap called Shane Fraser, was at Glenfarclas, he didn't bring along the sort of like, you know, the necessitation for, you know, huge amounts of sherry casks to be used, you know. I'm assuming he kind of like bought into the whole concept of the distillery and has kind of said, right, yes, we're being judicious with the use of sherry casks. We want the spirit to show through. We don't want to swamp it with too much oak. And yeah, I think that that's kind of like the way to go. And then also you look at their Morven bottling, which is their peated malt. Again, done the right way. It's not a behemoth, it's not a peat monster, it's 10 parts per million. It's subtle. It's just how a peated Highland, in my own personal opinion, should be. You know, just a whiff of peat, and I'm hoping that obviously it will show really well, because I have no reason to believe that it shouldn't, and just like the entirety of the range. So yeah, I'll put my hand in the air and say, big fan of the distillery, really like what they're doing, and I'm just hoping that, because I've only just opened these miniatures just prior to doing this tasting, I'm hoping they're going to show pretty well. As we well know, some distilleries have a tendency to use less than perfect spirit in their miniatures, but I'm guessing, given how fastidious the distillery is in their own releases, that they ain't going to fill crap into their miniatures. Well, at least I hope not anyway. So I think that's enough yap. Let's do some tasting. Right, okay, before I taste, oh, okay, a bit carried away there, I better tell you what I am tasting today. So we're going to kick off with, I suppose, what you would call their flagship bottling. This is the Northlands, like I said, all bottled at 46%, and refill bourbon, refill American oak. So I guess a combination of probably all three different types of casks that they tend to use. Bottling number 2 we're going to look at is called Langskip, which features the little sort of Viking sort of symbol on it, you know, like a sail. So again, 58%, sorry, this is the cask strength variant of the Northlands. Bottling number 3 we'll be looking at is called the Aurora. This is their sherried cask spirit, although in saying that, it sort of starts off in refill quarter casks, first fill bourbon casks, and then is vatted together with some first fill Oloroso. So again, they're just doing things the right way. No finishing, you know. Let's kind of vat together, get the balance right, and well, like I said, hopefully this will prove to be the point. Then we're going to move on to the Morven, or Morven I should say. This is obviously, like I said, peated to 10 parts per million, American oak. Should again hopefully be really nice. And finally we'll finish off with the small batch number 204, which I don't think is actually available through the distillery anymore, but you can probably pick it up at other retailers, one imagines. This was their 5th of their small batch releases, and it spent 5 years in first fill bourbon, and then 6 months finishing in fresh Madeira. So judicious finishing, and hopefully that's going to sort of going to be really nice. So anyway, now I can taste some whiskey. Right, let's see what the Northlands gives us then, shall we? A little bit on the youthful side. I get that slightly sort of Auchentoshan-y kind of rose petals, sort of strawberry moussey kind of character. Don't remember having so much of that. So again, barleyed, fresh, not as estery as I remember. There's white fruits, apricot, bit of salt, some minerals, but lovely freshness to it. And I really like this nose. Like I said, it feels maybe a touch younger than what it was in the past, but yeah, I like it. Let's see what the parts are. Nice grip, nice finish, lovely fruity aftertaste. Don't taste quite so young on the palate. I'm certainly not getting the Auchentoshan-y kind of rose petally kind of character. Certainly it's more fruit, it's oilier, it's slightly more weightier. White fruits, apricot, a little bit of banana skin. Subtle American oak, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of tannin. Really lovely structure, it has to be said. Good length. I mean, you know, none of these bottlings are particularly expensive. I don't know what they're retailing for, but I think off the top of my head, with the exception of the car strength bottling, they're around about 50 quid. That's got a lovely length to it, and the fruit kind of just keeps on lingering. And just goes to show that although the spirit is relatively young, it certainly is not lacking in character, and is perfectly sort of enjoyable. So yeah, great start. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Langskip. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Like the Northlands, but obviously more intense, more earthy, more barley. Quite tight. Don't get so much of the rose petal. Salt, gritty tannins. Touch of tightness, but that's the ABV. I can feel there's some lovely fruit underneath that. Sort of macerated pineapple and apricot and a little bit of toffee. Lovely nose. Again, has that wonderful freshness to it. See what the part's like. Again, pungent, gritty, earthy, barley, but then offset by this lovely fruitiness. A bit short, a bit masked, obviously, by the ABV. A little bit of vanilla creeps through, a little bit of white chocolate, touch of spice as well, and a lot of salt. I mean, that's a lovely whiskey. I mean, you know, it's kind of, like I said, it's got the sort of pungent, earthy intensity of character, but it's also got a sort of softer, fruitier side. That is absolutely gorgeous. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to the spirit. Softer, sweeter, more barleyed. A little bit more oak coming through now, so I'm getting more sweet vanillins. But again, it's got a lovely balance. There's a saltiness there which stops the nose becoming overly sweet. Not quite so earthy, not quite so tannic, not quite so tight, but again, structure is really good. See what the palate's like now. fuller, slightly oilier, more oak. Again, sweeter but salty as well. So again, we've got that lovely sort of sweet salt contrast going on the palate. A little bit of spice, barleyed, fresh. I mean, that is just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. I love that whiskey. That really is just pretty damn good at the end of the day. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Aurora. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Now, I've tasted the Aurora 2, maybe 3 times, I think. There does tend to be a bit of a sort of a variation on the amount of sherry character, which you're always going to get at the end of the day. This doesn't show a huge amount of sherry, so it's right up my street, it has to be said. Reminds me of the first time I ever tasted the Aurora. So it's got, again, it's got that sort of lovely barley-centric character to start off with. Salt, minerals, a subtle, very subtle amount of dried fruit. I mean, you know, you can look at the colour for a start. I mean, you know, that's sort of, you know, giving the game away that there ain't a huge amount of sherry character in this. And there's a little bit, that's enough. There's a touch of almost coconut, and sort of kind of raw cocoa bean kind of character. Feels a bit more malty as well. You know, maybe it's that sherry note is kind of just sort of bringing out a little bit more maltiness. So it's a little bit more denser than, say, the Langskip. But, you know, still a lovely whiskey. Really very, very good. Let's see what the palate's like. Delicious. I mean, really juicy, bursting with fruit on the aftertaste. The sherry kind of comes through quite nicely with that sort of dried grape mingling with the barley and the apricot and a little bit of pear and peach. Again, really salty aftertaste, really intensely salty aftertaste. Again, just fabulously balanced. And displaying more of the distillery character than I remember from previous tastings of this particular bottling. And like I said, I guess you're always going to get that with the sort of the sherried release when you're sort of vatting in. You're never going to get it exactly identical. But, you know, even so, when I have tasted it and it has been slightly heavier on the sherry, I still don't think it's ever really lost its balance. And this, to me, really nicely balanced. Okay, so let's move on to the Morven. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Crisp, fresh, back to the character of the Northlands. A little bit young. Touch of rose petal, touch of manure, touch of peat. I mean, again, sort of really balanced. I mean, you can certainly smell the peat. I mean, for 10 parts per million, it's kind of quite punchy, but it's not overpowering the spirit, like I said. And that peat has kind of obviously knocked off some of the estery character of the spirit, and it's obviously replacing it with its own character, but it's just really well balanced, and it's just salty, it's fruity, it's peaty. What's not to like? I mean, you know, just balanced really nicely. Let's see what that's like. crisp, fresh, salty, earthy peat, slightly phenolic, a little short. It does kind of tail off a bit, but that saltiness remains, that sort of slight minerality remains, wonderfully fresh. And actually the aftertaste is quite juicy. The fruit is just kind of meandering slightly back on the aftertaste, it has to be said. And again, the structure of that, the balance is really, really good. So yeah, you know, I think for someone, you know, even if you're not a huge peat fan, it's not a peat monster at all. It's subtle. It's just how a peated Highland, in my personal opinion, should be. Not masking the character of the spirit. And I really like the fact that they've kind of, you know, kept it as it is and haven't kind of, you know, bowed to the sort of, you know, those that want sort of a big screaming peat monster. I mean, you know, I guess they could probably do a sort of a standalone bottling of, you know, if they wanted to do a slightly heavily peated malt, which I guess would be fine. But by keeping the sort of the core bottling sort of subtle, yeah, I think it works really well. So yeah, good stuff. Okay, so on to the final bottling of the day. This is the small batch number 204. So 6 months finishing in fresh Madeira. Let's see what nose goes. It's like a beefier version of the Northlands. Again, really nicely balanced. Aromatic, fresh, quite nutty and biscuity, which is what you would expect from the Madeira. A lot of creamy American oak, spice, barley. It really is quite a big nose. There's a touch of lime, melon, earth, more salt. Oh, stunning, absolutely stunning. Again, beautifully balanced, just the right amount of time finishing in the Madeira to kind of emphasise the character of the spirit, rather than completely and utterly sort of, you know, stomp all over it. And this is just absolutely gorgeous. Really very good. See what that's like. The oak does grip a little bit to start off with. We are a bit heavier on the Madeira character, a bit more nuttier, biscuitier, slightly more tannic, grippy, intense. But the spirit character kind of comes through on the mid palate and flows through to the finish. Some lovely creamy American oak, barley, salt. Again, it kind of helps having tasted the Northlands and all the other bottlings, shall we say, before getting to this one, because you can kind of, I suppose if you weren't kind of to a certain extent dialed in on the distillery character, you might not kind of pick it up, because the Madeira on the palate is quite heavy. But I like that, you know, once you've kind of got your head in the kind of Northlands kind of, or the sort of the Wolfburn kind of scheme, I suppose, for want of a better word, you can kind of like pick up on the character within that. And like I said, maybe if you tasted that on its own, you might not have done so, but I still think that's absolutely wonderfully balanced. And like I said, although the distillery has no more stock of that particular bottling, I'm sure it's still available out and about at various retailers. So yeah, really good. So a big thank you to the distillery for sending that sample. Yeah, lovely. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, I think first off, hats off to Wolfburn for not putting crap in their miniatures for a start. I've always said that it's the wrong thing to do. If you've got crap spirit, get rid of it somewhere other way, because the point being is so many people will basically go, well, I don't know that distillery, I don't know the character, I don't really want to shell out on a full bottle, I'll buy a miniature or a miniature pack or something like that. And you know, these are the sort of things that curious customers will buy. And you know, if you put crap into them, they're going to go, oh my God, this is awful, I'm never going to buy this again in my entire life. You know, whereas if you put decent spirit in there, they're going to go, oh, that's gorgeous, I'll buy a bottle of that. And you've got somebody hooked. You know, it's not rocket science at the end of the day, as far as I can see. But anyway, what I really like is how nothing seems to have changed at Wolfburn. It's exactly as I remember it a couple of years ago when I last tasted it. Balanced, really coastal, and a classic sort of Highland spirit, really, at the end of the day. I think the Northland is a lovely spirit. Yeah, on the nose is a bit younger than I remember it, but the palate certainly made up for that. And again, it had plenty of character and a lovely freshness to it with a great balance. Langskip, I think, is possibly my personal favourite, and not because it's the cask strength bottling, but that extra ABV really punches up the intensity, and it had it's just such again a gorgeously balanced whiskey. You had the earthy intensity, you had the fruitiness, and it just worked so well. The Aurora, again, you know, not as heavy on the sherry as some previous batches that I've tasted. So, you know, yeah, hats off. Again, really beautifully balanced. And like I said, you know, it's not a monster. It's just got enough sherry just to add the nuance, which is just, in my personal opinion, what you want. And the same can be said for the Morven. Again, not a peat monster. Just the right amount of peat, just to add a nuance. And you know, I mean, certainly if you love your peated whiskies, yeah, it would certainly, I'd be happy to drink it, it has to be said. So you know, I think that's a real plus. And you know, it's no surprise that the small batch bottling, again, although it's a finish rather than a vatting, displays the same lightness of touch, the same sort of elegance. And you know, I think it's just, like I said, testament to what the distillery are doing. And like I said in the beginning, I think Wolfburn is a very, very underrated distillery. It just goes about its business, doesn't make a huge fuss, and maybe it should do. Maybe it should be more out there, you know. But then again, once you get out there and you've got all the marketing guff and all this kind of stuff, you start going, oh dear God. And so at the end of the day, it's up to sort of people like myself, you know, reviewers, to sort of to spread the word that the fact that the juice that Wolfburn is producing is bloody good juice at the end of the day, and you really should try it. And I hope you do. So anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Only the one for this week, I'm afraid. We're back to the normal routine. So until next week, good dramming and good afternoon.